I literally was devastated for so long. But when I look back on that, in hindsight, I didn't trust myself. I didn't believe in myself.
Yeah.
Why was I looking externally for somebody to believe and validate my experience?
Hello, and welcome to the 40 Drinks Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie McLaughlin. You know, sometime in the years around our 40th birthday, many of us start to feel what I call the ick. Like some part of your life that had been working well no longer works and you don't know what to do about it. I know that was true for me, and I fought against it, which only made it a messier process. But having 40 drinks with 40 people over the course of a year helped me escape the influence of that ick. On this podcast, I welcome you to tap into my stories and experience, as well as those of my guests, to help you emerge from your own ick and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes we made along the way. My mission is to make it common cultural knowledge that there is a transition most of us face around age 40, and then showcase so many versions of that transition that every single person approaching or recently turned 40 with dread in their heart knows that they are not alone. Today, my guest is Laurie-Ann Murabito, a former shy girl who built herself a career speaking to the world. At age 36, she became a widow and had to find her place in a world that always asks whether you're single or married. Today, we'll talk about how she used optimism to move through that difficult period and the rebuilding that came afterwards. Hi, Laurie-Ann. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Stephanie. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I'm so glad to have you here with me for a number of reasons. One, fellow podcaster. Two, fellow New Hampshireite. Those two
That's
don't
right.
often cross over. So
Right.
yay, New Hampshire podcasters.
Yes.
And three, when we were just chatting before we turned on the recording, we realized that you and I have some really common experiences in the tiniest town in central New Hampshire, which is such a riot.
That is so funny. So funny. Yes.
What a small world.
It really is very small.
And I know one of my great aunts used to say something like this, but like the older you get, the smaller it gets, right?
And I think that's true. And that's just because you just meet new
Right.
people and more people. But it's also so wonderful at the same time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I love that because it's like all of a sudden I feel like you and I are friends because we have this common experience. But I want to talk to you today about your midlife transition. I'm really interested to get into this story. You've told me bits and pieces of it. So why don't we start at the beginning? What were the forces that shaped you? Who were you when you get to your early to mid 30s?
God, who was I? My life, like I put into categories based on like who was I dating back then?
Yes,
Which
yes.
helps me remember like who was I as a person? How did I show up in that relationship? What job was I in? So my
Right.
early 30s, I was still working in a hospital,
Okay.
getting ready to leave. I was not one of those people that I didn't make a good employee because I was always like, here's how we can do things so much better. Here's how we can make more money. And in a hospital setting, people are just like, no, it's insurance that pays
Right.
our bills. And it's like, no, it's relationships with doctors and keeping people sick. Basically, like healthcare is a business. That's all there is to it. And I remember thinking that even in my early 30s.
Wow.
So that was
What
my
part of
early.
healthcare were you in?
I did cardiac and vascular ultrasound.
Okay.
So I have a degree in exercise physiology. So I kind of like was all about this cardiology stuff. And that's what got me into healthcare.
Okay. All right. So, and it's funny that you say that you kind of look at your life by who was I dating. I do the exact same thing, but that actually is a wonderful segue into the story. So, in your early to mid 30s, you were, I think, 34, and you started dating someone special. Tell me a little bit about him.
I did date someone special. People talk about that moment when you meet the right person, you just know. It's almost like, here's my Prince Charming. Well, I did have one of those moments, but didn't realize it at the time. I took a class on preparing for retirement. Yes, I'm one of those geeky people that I'm only in my 30s and I'm taking this class because I don't want to be behind.
Right.
So I took the class while I was dating somebody else. That didn't work out. I ended up living with my sister, and she had some kid who came to the house. and was giving her what I thought was god awful financial advice. And I was like, Sue, I don't know a whole lot about all this stuff, but the fact
Right.
that he doesn't read the Wall Street Journal on a daily basis, I think is a problem. I know this guy. I took his class. Let's go find out. And I ended up in the class again, but this time the teacher asked me out. And that was Bob. And Bob and I dated for 2 years. And literally, after the end of that first class, when he asked me out and we were just talking, I remember just like watching his mouth move, but I didn't hear a thing he was saying because
Yeah.
I was like the pitter patter, like, oh my God. I literally said to myself, this is the man that I've been waiting for. And we started dating, and 2 years later, he proposed. And then 8 months later, I became a widow.
Oh,
Yeah, that was hard.
that's the understatement of the week.
I will share with you because this is always an awkward time when people find out about this. But let
Yeah.
me share with you what my sister said, because my sister was sharing with one of her fellow employees that my sister just lost her husband. The woman says, "Oh my God, that's so awful." Sister's reply is, "No, actually it wasn't. They
Yeah.
lived a lifetime of love in a short period of time." And that's really a beautiful way to put it. I learned so much about myself,
Yeah.
so much about what I was capable of, so much about relationships.
Was it something expected? Did you have any sense that
Yeah, I did. It was
okay.
cancer.
Okay.
Cancer, the equal opportunity disease, as I like to
Yeah.
call it,
Yeah.
doesn't care about your education, your finances,
Nope.
your health stat. I mean, because he was actually an extremely healthy man, except for this annoying tumor that grew on his spine that just wouldn't go away.
So, if I remember from our first conversation, you said he had been married before and he had a child. Is that right?
He did.
Okay. And so, the couple of years that you guys were together, tell me a little bit about, how it was that you learned so much about yourself and how you guys, created a family. I mean, tell me a little bit about what those years were like.
So his daughter was, like she was out of high school, she was in her career. So she was a little bit older. I wouldn't normally use the word like we were a family. It's not like I was her
Okay.
mom or anything. I do think that I was a mentor to her.
Great.
And she's just a lovely human being. Between him and the mom, I think they raised a beautiful human being
Mm,
who was out there. And she's actually a nurse as well.
mm,
He also had a brother and a sister, but they also relied on me when he really did get ill.
mhm.
But I was just like, yeah, but I'm a new wife too. like,
Right.
like
Brand
this is
new.
hard. Yeah. But at least from my healthcare experience and background, I was able to navigate the healthcare system. So
Yeah.
I did know the right questions to ask. I would say I did a lot of sneaky things, but got my way because I
Yeah.
wanted the best care for him. And what did I learn about myself? I'm very resourceful.
Mm,
I'm very dedicated.
mhm.
And I remember a former boyfriend saying to me, "You're the kind of person that when the going gets rough, you're going to get going." And that always stuck with me. And I remember saying, like, that's not true because my mother was mentally ill. It's not like I ever abandoned her.
Right.
I grew up in chaos and turmoil. So when Bob got ill, I certainly didn't run. I just put my head down. It was as if somebody said, and I'm just going to quote, this is something that Bob actually did say himself. If somebody told him to go dig out the sand at the beach, here's your tablespoon, he
Mm,
would just put his head down, never look at it as being defeated. He would just put his head down and go to work.
yeah.
And I did exactly that. I just put my head down, never really thought about later. I was
Mhm.
just like, well, let's just focus on where we are right now. What can I do? What do I have control over? And those are the
Mhm.
things that I would take care of. I have found multiple times in my life where I don't think about the third step or the fourth step, which is sort of funny. And that'll come into play later on when I talk to you about speaking.
You also said to me that you used, and I'll use the word used sort of generally, but optimism. throughout this period of time. Tell me how you employed optimism to help you and everyone else get through this period in time.
Well, my younger sister, Rachel, her nickname for me is Positive Patty. And that's always been my outlook. Now, when I was in my early 20s, I had a lot of pessimistic moments.
Hmm.
So I feel like my optimism was literally a choice one day.
Mm,
I was just like, I can either see the world as a glass is half full or that it's half empty. I'm going to choose to see it as it's half full. I made the decision. I never had to remake the decision. A positive attitude just goes a long way. And if I could remain positive, then Bob, who was ill and trying to get better, he would remain positive. If I
right.
remain positive, his brother and sister and daughter, because they were constantly looking to me like, what's happening? What's
Yeah.
next? Is he dying? And I'd just be like, he's doing great.
Yeah.
And so they looked to me. So I just always felt like it really was my responsibility to be the positive one, to be the positive pillar.
Mm,
And then everybody else would, which, these are the people who surrounded Bob. And
yeah.
so then he would be, because he's looking at everybody else like, what's happening to me?
Right.
He's looking for answers. And our attitude kept him positive
Yeah.
and feeling good.
Yeah. And that goes a long way from a patient perspective. My dad also got the equal opportunity disease. And he liked to say my dad was also quite a funny guy. But he used to say, I have prostate cancer and not the good kind. Meaning not the kind that, at 85 years old, you'll die of something else. And he truly did have a very positive outlook. And that helps in, as you're making your way through, and certainly also for prognosis. I mean, it ultimately did take him, much like Bob, but I think those last whatever period of time, it's like you can either make it better and wring everything that you can out of that time,
Yeah.
or we can all make it worse and make it harder and make it feel bad every day. And
Yes.
so I understand that situation and the choice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell your listeners a story on, like, I think it was literally the last day. I must have gone out to go do something and came back. And so music is very, very powerful for me. And I will listen to upbeat music. And that just like that, this is from my, teaching fitness classes, because I needed to bring up my energy. So I
Mhm.
must have been listening to some very peppy music in the car, because I came back and I was being like a little excited and happy. And he says to me, now mind you, I have a hospital bed in my living room. He
Yeah.
says, "You're awfully happy for a woman who's about to lose her husband." But this is the sort of relationship that we had. I
Yes.
stopped and said, because I was always about giving him choices.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, would you like me to be sad and crying or happy and smiling?
Right.
And he went, I'll take the smiling version. I said, you've got it.
Yeah.
I would just be that.
Yeah, it's such a nice way to set the tone
Mm,
for the time and the space.
yeah.
I remember my dad at the very end, he was laying flat at that point, not sitting up on his own. And I walked into the room and he reached his hand out to me and he said, "There she is. There's my daughter from my first marriage." My father was only ever married once. He and my
That's what
mother
I,
were high school sweethearts, right? Till the very end. And so it was like, yeah, that for me was a moment, not that moment specifically, but that period in time, I realized that, humor and silliness and mirth were at a cellular level for him. Like literally, he could almost not speak anymore, but he was still cracking jokes. It
and
was
look at how you still remember that moment. I mean, your dad
absolutely.
gave you such a gift
Yes.
by saying that to you. Good for
Yes.
dad.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you were awful chipper for somebody who was about to lose her husband, and then you ultimately did lose your husband. What was it like after that? Tell me a little bit about the aftermath.
Oh, putting your life back together just a little bit at a time. This was literally the first major death in my life.
Mm,
and it had to be my husband.
right. You
No,
didn't get any starter losses.
right.
Let's not work our way up with some grandparents, an aunt or an uncle.
Right. So, it was about putting my life back together. I would make a list of what I had to do the next day. I always
Mhm,
made that at night. And sometimes I would go to Home Depot like 3 days in a row. I would just do one thing,
mhm,
just like go buy the light bulbs, go change the light bulbs, like that day. And then I would, like, when I was done my list, I literally would sit on the couch and just watch TV. So
mhm,
some days I started watching TV like at 1 in the afternoon,
mhm.
going until I went to bed at like 9 or 10 o'clock. But then I slowly realized, like, oh, wow, it's 6 o'clock and I'm watching TV now.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of measured how I was doing. It was just like I was getting back into life and putting my life back together. So that was one of the bigger moments. I just kind of like, wow. And also I knew that I had to change the meaning of the dates. And the
Mhm,
dates that I chose were the date of his death and also what would have been our first anniversary.
mhm.
So our anniversary was the first date. So I had a cocktail party in my house and invited certain people. They were special people who had been around for that year and helped with that during that time when Bob was sick.
Yeah.
And then the 1 year mark was more everybody who had helped me in that past year. And I do remember somebody saying, and this was on the November 1st, Bob's anniversary of his passing.
Mhm.
Somebody asked, because we were all hanging around in the kitchen because that's what people do.
Right?
Laurie, can you tell or explain or introduce like everybody? And I went around the room and I introduced each person and how they had helped me, what their role was in that first year of being without Bob.
I can't even imagine how you would get through something like that without
But I
tears down your
did.
face. You did.
But
Wow.
I did
Wow.
because I was in immense gratitude
Yeah.
that these people helped me out.
Yeah.
And then they all kind of came together to literally to celebrate Bob's life.
Yeah.
So it was actually very beautiful. And I would say that that's something that I learned during the whole
Yeah.
process is that death is as beautiful as birth.
That's a hard piece of learning to come around to. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
That's probably just the positive Patty in me. It's like, how else could I look at this but that it
Yeah.
was a beautiful experience to be surrounded by love.
Yeah.
And, like I lost my mom about 18 months ago. And I felt the exact same thing that
Mm,
death is as beautiful as birth. She was surrounded by her four daughters. And there was
yeah.
so much love in that room.
Wow. That is a really beautiful way to look at that.
Mhm. I think
Wow.
to be somebody else or to step into the role that is needed is what I did both times. Like and I'm the big sister also. Like my other three sisters were obviously like there was like a lot of sadness in the room, but to be able to be there for that person, for my mom,
Mm.
for Bob, that this was the way that they wanted to go.
It is an honor to be able to be there at that moment. So when Bob died, you were, I believe, 36.
Hmm.
And then the 1 year anniversary brings you to 37. So now we're coming into our late 30s. So tell me about your late 30s coming into 40.
So I'm starting to realize I'm capable of so much. I mean, if I can literally make it through the death of my husband, I can do anything. And so that's when I had started, it's like, well, like there were a couple of things that I would say were on my list of things to learn and to do, but it was just like never the right time. Like
Hmm.
I was already coaching people, so that was one thing. But now I was like, I'm going to go for the certification. I'm going to finish this up and I'm really going to start speaking more.
Mm.
And so joined National Speakers Association. And I would say my first weekend conference, like somebody said something to me and I was just like, I was devastated. But
What did
she
they
must
say?
know better. She must know better than me. I didn't
Oh,
trust myself then. What
oh,
did she say to me? It was during a coffee break And because I was new, she didn't recognize me. She was like, "Hey, like I'm such and such." We introduced ourselves. "What's your story?" And I thought she meant like really like what my story was. So I tell her about Bob's passing, I'm a widow. And she says, "That story's already been told. You'll never make it." And she pivoted and walked away. I was left there like, oh my God. She asked me what my story was. She didn't ask me what I wanted to speak on. But all I heard was, "It's already been done. Nobody'll ever, like, listen, like, no one's ever gonna hire you for that." I literally was devastated for so long. But that comes down to, like, when I look back on that, in hindsight, I didn't trust myself. I didn't believe in myself.
Yeah.
Why was I looking externally for somebody to believe and validate my experience?
Right.
It took me a number of years to get there, though, folks.
Yeah, right, right. As it does for most of us. But it's interesting. I wonder, was that so often we talk about energy and matching energy, right? And different of my guests, like to remind me that, we're all energy. And I just wonder if this is just sort of popped into my head, if she was reflecting back at you what you thought at that period of time.
Could be. I was confused but again, like, I didn't wanna talk about
I
grief.
know.
I didn't
Yeah.
wanna talk about being because I didn't want people to say, "Oh, poor Laurie-Ann.
Right,
Poor
right.
widow." Like, I never wanted anybody to say that to me because I didn't feel that way, and I felt
Yeah.
like that would just pigeonhole me also. But my
Yeah.
experience in taking care of Bob was leadership,
Yeah.
and that's what I ended up speaking on because I was actually building a team of people that didn't even know they were on the same team. And
Ah,
I was leading them. So I was like leading like the healthcare nurses, the hospice nurses, the surgeons, the nurses, everybody who was taking care of him. I was
yeah.
literally leading them and had to say things to people to get what I wanted. So there was a lot of influence in there as well. So I learned a lot of skills, and that's why I ended up speaking on leadership in corporate environments.
Yeah. What a terrible interaction with that woman. I feel
Yeah.
like she did not lay out the rules of engagement. So here you were thinking you were having a personal conversation with someone and not an audition, for crying out loud.
That's a great way to put it, that it was an audition. Like, was I good enough? Like, I was this young girl, but just didn't have a voice.
Yeah.
I didn't ask any questions. What do you mean? What's my story?
You didn't do the clarification of which story would you like to hear?
Right.
Personal, professional.
Yeah.
Oh my
So, I mean, like,
goodness.
looking back on it, I can laugh at it, but guess what? There was a lot of gifts from that moment
Yeah.
because I routinely talk about this story.
Do you know who she is? Like, if you saw her again, would you know her?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I wanna do, like, snake eyes at her, like, "Zzz, zzz, zzz." Oh, what a terrible
Yeah.
do you okay, I wanna know something. This is terrible, I wouldn't normally ask this, but, like, do you know, like, is she a terrible person?
No, I don't
Or
think
was
she's a
that
terrible person.
okay, it was
I did
just a
actually get to know her a lot better. I No, she's not a terrible person, but I've no idea what was happening in her life at that time
exactly,
that made her
exactly.
say something like that to me.
We don't know the mix of what was going on her side or yeah.
This is the
But
positive Patty, I always give
yep.
people like, I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt.
Of course, of course. But of course, I can see how that would shake your foundations of confidence as you were moving into this new world of wanting to be a speaker. I mean, you've spent your whole career in healthcare, in an operating room or in a medical
Mhm,
environment. Like, this is so completely different from you, and you're just a fledgling, bird in the nest at this point in time. So,
mhm.
tell me about the next couple of years of, like, trying to put the pieces of that dream back together.
It took me a long time with leadership. Granted, there's so many people who speak on leadership.
Yeah. Hi, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute. I've always got my eye on how I can continue to make the show better. And to do that, I want to hear from you. Ask me anything you ever wanted to know about turning 40, about this 40 transition, about the ick, about what my guests share of their stories or I share of mine. And I want to say as well that if you want to learn more about this 40 transition, please consider getting on my email list where I explore the topic in different ways than I do here in my guest episodes. You can do both of those things on my website, 40drinks.com. And don't forget to spell out the word 40. There's a contact button right at the top of the page if you want to drop me a line, and there's a subscribe button as well if you want to get on that email list. And finally, if you're enjoying today's conversation, hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might appreciate this exploration of midlife's twists and turns. All right, back to the conversation.
So how did I stand out? Like I wrote a couple of books. I did well with the clients that I worked with. I did some one-on-one executive clients with some pretty high profile people across the globe. It wasn't until like I got a text message from somebody, and this is how I got into what I'm doing currently. I got this text message from somebody saying, Laurie-Ann, do you write speeches for people? Now, I was like hopping on airplanes. I mean, literally at the time that she sent me the text message, I would come home, wash my clothes, just throw them in the suitcase again, because I knew that I was going to be picking up that suitcase a couple of days later. But I would say, looking back on my time as a leadership speaker, it was like I was running through mud. There's a lot of people out there speaking on leadership. But it wasn't until this woman sends me this text message, do I write speech? And I was like, no, but I know she is. And I'm like, I'll meet you for coffee. I'll see what I can do for you because I've got my coaching background. And she'd been losing money for 5 years in her business. Husband's like, you can't keep doing this when you retire. She's 3 years away from retiring from her government job. And if you know anything about government jobs, you'll stand on your head for 3 more years to finish off your time. And I was just like, oh, Sharon, I'll teach you how to write a speech. I'll teach you how to get booked. I'll teach you how to leverage it into, I'll teach you what I know.
Yeah.
And I had so much fun teaching her. And after she gave her very first presentation, she walked away with 3 full paying clients to a small, tiny audience, by the way. There was only like 15 people in the audience. And she got referred to 2 other places to speak.
Yeah.
That to me was a home run because 1, it changed her business and her speech was so good that we had crafted something so fun that the meeting planner was just like, here are 2 other places that you need to go and speak at.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them about you. So you always want people to remember you, rave about you, and refer you. Those are the 3 R's that I strive for with my clients. So I feel like it took me a long time to get here to this point. But had I not gone through that rocky path, I certainly wouldn't be here.
Right.
I do believe that everything happens for us, not to us.
Yeah.
And so I eventually found my calling, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was helping other people craft speeches that they can use as their best form of marketing. So I don't work with professional speakers. I work with like coaches and consultants, small business owners.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. It's so interesting. You talked about the years that you were traveling and speaking being like going through mud. And I would bet that everybody listening, and I certainly know that I can relate to that feeling of just having to work so hard to make any progress, right? To
Or just why is it so hard?
oh God,
This is what I'm supposed to do. Why is it so hard?
Yeah.
I loved helping my clients. I
Right.
loved helping them build better teams, lead better, lead with their own leadership. I loved it, but it just felt like it was so hard.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because there are periods in my life where I feel like things are going so well and so easily. I always think, well, the universe wants me to go in this direction because it's so smooth and so easy. Versus, last year when I was trying to do X, I felt like I was, dragging weights behind me. But I feel like we have to go through those periods in order to sort of have the compare and contrast. I can think of it when I was working for some other people, much like you, right? I'm not do well working for other people. And I had some of these great jobs that were doing really cool things. God, it just always felt like pushing a boulder up a hill, even though I liked parts of the job, I liked the people, there's so many things I liked. So yeah, that
There's
description.
yeah, there's no way I would be a speaking coach without having spent those years on the stage, talking to meeting planners, crafting speeches. Like I couldn't be doing this without going through the mud, basically.
Right. And so some of that mud, it's interesting to think, like, to try to put it into context. Like, are those our dues? Are those the foundation that we build, to build something else upon it? You could sort of look at it a bunch of different ways, but then you have to ask, what's the difference between going through the mud and building the foundation, or going through the mud on your way to where you're supposed to be and just being in the wrong place and not noticing it? How
Yeah.
do you know the difference?
Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost like it's the same trail that you have
Yes.
to get to. And like on the other side is where there's Easy Street, or you can keep going on down Struggle Avenue,
Right.
but it's the same. It's
Yeah.
that same path and I had to go through that. Again, nobody would hire me as a speaking coach had I
Right.
not had all of these years of being an actual speaker. Like I made a good living, but I just didn't get to the level that I wanted to.
I think it's identifying the off ramp from the muddy path and being willing to take it versus doubling down on the supposed tos, the shoulds,
Yeah.
this is the direction, right? Versus
Yeah.
being able to see, aha, there's a turn on the path. And if I went this way, doesn't mean that what I've been doing is a waste. It just means I'm going to change direction.
Right.
Hmm.
So fun.
Interesting.
I'm interviewing for a new virtual assistant. And a couple of them have asked me, because I'll ask, what questions do you have for me? And one woman that I interviewed yesterday said, who's your competition?
Hmm.
And I said to her, I don't know.
Yeah.
And part of me was like, there's lots of speaking coaches out there, but there aren't, I don't know any other speaking coach that literally focuses and only works with coaches, consultants, and small business owners. That's
Right.
it. Those are my people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as I'm answering that question to her, I'm just like, I don't care about competition.
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter to me. Unlike when I was in that leadership role, it was just like there were so many people that I was competing against. There was always competition. And now it's just like,
Yes.
like I've evolved. I'm a different person than I was way back then in my 40s. And now I'm just like, I don't care if there's competition. They do it
Right.
their way. I do it my way.
Right. It took me a long time to learn that. I own a marketing agency, and I started it 17 years ago now, which is a long time. At the time, there were a couple of guys in the business community who owned agencies that were older than mine. They'd been around a lot longer and much bigger than mine. And so for a lot of years, I looked up to them and said, like, oh, wow. And I always thought I was doing it wrong
Mm.
because I was doing it differently than how they were doing it, even though
Mhm.
I would say to anybody who would listen, well, I don't want a 40-person agency. That's just not something I'm interested in. So like, why would I think that I should be doing things that way if I didn't want that outcome? But it took me a long time to realize that my way was different. And so if somebody said to me, are those guys very successful, exceptionally good businessmen, are they your competition? I would say, not in a million years. They have, lions and I have a giraffe. Like they have apples and I have a kumquat. Like it's just a different thing. Different people are drawn to me to work with me. And I always have to remind myself every time I think I should be doing all the things that they say you're
Yeah.
supposed to be doing. I always have to remind myself, like, stay in your shoes, Steph, stay in your shoes. Because when you do it your way, you get successful. And when you try to
Yes.
do it their way, it's hard work.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's a great story and so
Yeah.
true that I think we are taught as women that like we're not to trust ourselves, we're not doing it right. We always have to look outside of ourselves and follow somebody else's lead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
had you not stayed in your shoes, you'd have had 40 people like on a team and
Yeah.
been attracting the same type of people as they were, and like, who would take care of your people?
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting that if you can open up to the things that are meant for you, there actually is less competition. The things that are meant for you aren't meant for other people. So there actually is no competition.
Yeah. Follow the
Yeah.
breadcrumbs. That's
Yeah.
what I tell people. They will just be there for you. Follow
Yes.
them. What are the messages that you keep seeing over and over again, hearing from people over and over again? Just follow them.
Yes. Yes. And I've often said with previous guests during this period of life, when you start blossoming and blooming and sort of coming into yourself, not only do you follow the breadcrumbs, but you do two other things. You listen to the voices in your head, no matter how crazy they are,
Mm-hmm.
and no matter how crazy they may seem, the kismet things that pop up in front of you, those are meant for you. Those are, to your point, the breadcrumbs, right? The
Yes.
crazy things. Well, I've heard about that book 3 times in the last week. That's your book.
Go
Go
read
and
the
buy
book.
it. Go read the book.
You talking about this reminds me of back in my leadership days before I got that text message.
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling so tired hopping on and off airplanes. I felt like I was working for a company again. I was just punching a clock. I literally said, Universe, I need a different business model.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, I get a text message. Talk about following the breadcrumbs. And I just did it as a favor. I was like, all
You're
right,
right.
I'll help you.
Yeah. It didn't come with a grand plan of this is my off ramp.
No, it was
Yeah.
just, I had fun. I had so
Yeah.
much fun helping her and
Yeah.
having, like, we came up with a prop because props are so powerful in
Mm-hmm.
presentations. And because she was an image consultant, she had, like, people love presents. So
Yeah.
she had two presents that she would hold up. One that was wrapped in brown paper, no
Yep.
bow, no nothing. And the other one was like this beautiful, beautifully wrapped present with a beautiful bow. She's like, which one do you want to open?
Yeah.
People always say the beautifully packaged gift, that's the one I want to open because it's so intriguing. That's what clothing does for you.
Right. Yeah. You brought a metaphor to life.
Yeah. It was, but and it was fun. But again, I got to see some of my talents and skills that I took for granted working for myself, but helping somebody else. They created these beautiful presentations, and now I call presentations, it's verbal art. That's what I help
Mm.
people do, is craft these beautiful presentations. It's art.
Interesting. So let's circle back to your personal life for a minute, though, because your love story isn't done, even
No.
though we had to say goodbye to Bob.
Mhm.
Tell me about your 40th birthday.
I was with somebody who I don't want to remember. That's just being honest. But a couple of years later, I met the man that I would marry next.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember you said to me that your dad and your sister wanted to throw you a birthday party for your 40th. And you
Yes,
said, I'm going to go
never.
hang out with this guy.
Yeah.
And then you said,
Mhm.
he didn't last. I should have gone to my dad's.
I really should have. Because there's a friend she was going to be there for that weekend. She couldn't be there for any of the other weekends. And I'm sad to say that she's no longer here with us.
Oh,
She was such a special lady to me.
yeah.
So yeah, I didn't follow the right breadcrumb there.
Yeah. I mean, we do that all the time. We second guess ourselves and make these choices. I don't want
Mhm.
to party. Let's
Yeah.
just. We also get more adept at seeing the choices good and bad from
Yes.
close up, from far away. We can see them sort of sooner than we did when we were younger, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were in your early 40s when you met Mike, right?
Yes. I
Yeah.
was 42.
Okay. All
Yeah, I
right.
think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
We're coming up on our 13th anniversary. 12th,
Wow.
no, this will be our 12th anniversary this September.
Wow. That's amazing. And tell me how that love story was different than the first one.
I had to teach myself that I don't have to be the caretaker. But I do see, like, after Bob, there was a guy that I dated, and it was just like I stepped out of that caretaking role, but I felt like after the guy that I kind of want to forget, I don't know if I really was the caretaker. I was a little too moldable then. But this relationship, it was nice to know, like, I had a partner. Like, I
Mm.
specifically remember this time that my car broke down on my way to the gym. Mike and I are already married. And I just call him because I had gone to Starbucks and my car did not make it. I called AAA and they were coming to get my car. And I call him and
Yeah.
I just tell him, like, hey, my car broke down. I called AAA, so they're going to come get the car and we'll bring it to the mechanic. And I literally have my head down and I'm just playing on social media, engaging because that's what we do as business owners. And then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden I see these two pair of boots and I look up and there he is. He's like, come on, let's go to breakfast. Like, it never even dawned on me to ask him to come get me.
Right.
I was just like, I guess I'm just going to get in the car, go to the mechanics, and I'll just wait there. But turns
Right.
out it was a little bit more of a bigger deal than just like, let's change the oil or something. They needed it for a couple of days. But it was just funny because I didn't know that I could, like, ask
Yeah.
for what I needed. So that's been part of my learning in this
Mm.
relationship. He's just, like, done things.
Mm.
And it's just like, huh? Like, you'll go do that for me?
Yeah. Or even not knowing what we need, right? Sometimes our partners know better or can see, right? That, he probably understood, like, well, if the car's really broken down, you're going to
Or
need a
it
ride at some point.
could actually be that. Or he was just laying there thinking, my wife is stranded somewhere.
Right.
And so this is his first marriage. So he didn't get married till he was like 46.
Mm-hmm.
And to think, like, what was going on in his mind, like, I'm not going to leave my wife stranded someplace.
Yeah.
Like, how's she going to get home?
Right.
So he
Yeah.
just shows up but all his words were, let's go to breakfast. I was
Oh,
like,
that's
I was just going to go to the mechanics and I was going to walk to the gym. That's what I was going to do. I was going to walk to the gym in a snowstorm. just having you, like, take me back to that moment. I mean,
yeah.
that's so funny. It's
How
hilarious.
how very self-sufficient of you.
Right.
How very self-contained.
Yes. And I
Yeah.
don't want to bother anybody.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, but it's nice to know you don't have to and you're not a bother and
I
there's
can
somebody
ask him,
there
like,
to.
hey, I need a
Yeah.
ride to go drop the car off.
Yeah.
Here's what I need help with. Can you pick this up for me? It is very nice,
Yeah.
but learning curve.
Yeah. Wow. So your midlife transition was it's so interesting the bookends, right? With, Bob from 34 to 36 and Mike from, 42 to 44 when you guys got married. It's a really interesting picture to look at and think about how you made your way through that midlife transition.
Yeah, without a manual.
None of us get manuals. It would be
I wish
so
we
much easier
did.
if we did. No kidding. Do you always think of Greatest American Hero when you think about the manual? I always think somebody says, I wish life had a manual. I always think of the
Yes,
Greatest American Hero.
yes. It would make it so much easier, but at the same time, then you'd make no mistakes. Even if somebody had told me, all right, you're going to do this leadership thing and it's going to feel like you're running through mud. And it's going to be really hard for this many years, but then something's going to happen. Someone's going to send you a text message. It's going to completely change your life. I'd be
Yeah,
like, whatever's. Like, I'm still going to go through the muck.
right.
I would just be hoping that the text message would come sooner
Yeah,
since it was going
right.
to change my life. But
Which
then
means
I
you'd always be distracted from the mud because you'd always be looking for the text message. So you wouldn't actually be focused on the things you needed to be focused on.
right. And I wouldn't be fully present in the mud. And I had to
Right,
learn all that stuff because that's why people hire me. They're just
right.
like, you were an actual professional. So, like, you made a living off of
Yeah,
doing this. You negotiated contracts. You found your own gigs. You did the referrals. You asked for the testimonials.
yeah.
And now I get to teach those.
Oh, what a perfect metaphor for the midlife transition. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to go through the mud. You can't
Enjoy,
not.
but enjoy the mud. Enjoy the messy middle.
Yeah.
because that's what makes the other side so beautiful.
And so sweet. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's how you know it's sweet too, because again, you have something to compare and contrast against. And
Mhm.
I had terrible, terrible romantic relationships in my 20s and 30s. And then I met my husband when I turned 40. And much like you, I always say we met the old fashioned way. We met in a bar. I saw him across the way. And I had this moment where kind of like everything, it was almost like you'd see it on TV. Everything went out of focus except him. And this was like an hour before I met him. Like, I didn't even know. Maybe I thought I was getting a buzz on or something, but it was like the universe was like, zoom in on this
Yeah.
character.
Talk
And
about
then,
energy attracting energy.
yeah. And then an hour later, he comes within speaking distance of where I was sitting, and I started to sass off at him, and the rest is history. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Laurie-Ann, what a wonderful discussion we've had today. Thank you so much for being so generous with your story. You've done such a great job of helping me illustrate so much of this midlife transition about, the messes that we go through around 40, but how worth it is on the other side.
Yeah, I wouldn't give it up for anything.
Me neither.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. I'm still out on my mini break right now and don't have access to my usual recording setup to dig deeper into an aspect of this week's conversation. So let's just look at who you can look forward to meeting next week. I am super excited to share with you my first interview with an entire couple. Craig and Meredith Bennett lived the default life through their mid-30s, doing life the way they had been instructed to do it, and realizing that they were just going through the motions. So they decided to build a life by design versus a life by default. I'll see you next week. The 40 Drinks podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.